I'm Elisabeth Myers, aka Tilila, with another Tilila report live from Marrakesh, Morocco. In the North African language of Tamazight, Tilila means freedom, and that's what we cover. Anything that impacts democracy and the rule of law and your right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Today's issues impact freedom in some very fundamental ways that we as Americans have taken for granted for 200 years. Principally that the loser of an election concedes, followed by a peaceful transition of power. Well, the January 6th committee that's been investigating the January 6th Capitol attack has been investigating the scheme to overthrow the 2020 presidential election by preventing Congress from counting the electoral votes. The committee opened up its public hearings on June the 9th. I happened to be in the US in June, and I was able to watch the first few hearings live. I learned, however, that many Americans are not watching them. So for today's Tilila report, I thought I'd give a summary of what we've seen so far. But I urge you to watch them for yourselves. Judge the facts that the committee is bringing to the American people. Even prominent Republican supporters of Donald Trump have had their minds changed by the depth of the efforts to keep Donald Trump in power against the will of the American people. Our country has never before seen anything like this. So each of the now 7 hearings has presented evidence methodically and thoroughly demonstrating that the person responsible for an attempted coup on our democratically elected government was Donald Trump. By subpoena or voluntarily, most of the witnesses who have testified before the committee, either in pre-recorded testimony or live testimony, have been Republicans who have supported Donald Trump, and in some cases have said they will continue to support Trump if he should become the Republican nominee for president in 2024. So let's talk about the first hearing. The committee presented a behind the scenes and up close video of what happened on January the 6th. It showed footage from police body cameras, the Capitol hallways, and office footage, as well as police radio communications. It showed on-camera testimony from many of the people closest to Trump, including his daughter Ivanka, who broke with him over his lies that the election was stolen. She testified that she accepted what Bill Barr said at the time, that there was no election fraud sufficient to overcome the election. Barr's sworn testimony was that Barr had told Trump this on numerous occasions. The first hearing showed that the people closest to Trump knew that the election wasn't stolen. It also showed far-right extremist groups, the Proud Boys and Oath Keepers, on camera saying that they went to the Capitol that day because they believed that that's what Trump wanted them to do. It showed that after Trump's stand back and stand by remark in a debate, membership in the Proud Boys tripled. The committee showed through texts and other communications that pretty much everyone around Donald Trump knew the truth, not only his attorney general and his daughter, but also Fox's Sean Hannity and Trump's former press secretary, Kayleigh McEnany. But no one could rein Trump in and dissuade him from continuing to push that lie. The hearings, the first hearing linked the timing of Trump's tweets with video of militant members in the crowd literally reading from Trump's tweets through a bullhorn, like marching orders firing up the mob. It juxtaposed video of horrific violence from the mob of Trump supporters, striking officers with hockey sticks in one scene, with video of Trump 5 days later saying that these were, quote, peaceful people. In sum, that first hearing made a strong opening case that former President Donald Trump was a central character responsible for what happened. The second hearing went on to show what was happening with the Trump campaign and in the White House in the days following election night 2020. Taped testimony from Trump's campaign advisors and lawyers showed a picture of a president who refused to listen to the truth, who insulated himself in a bubble of election-like conspiracies, who fleeced his own supporters out of money based on the lie and wielded the power to incite violence. Taped video testimony of Trump's campaign manager, Bill Stepien, as well as senior advisor Jason Miller and multiple lawyers, contrasted what they called Team Normal with another team led by Rudy Giuliani. Team Normal professionals, campaign professionals, told Trump the same message, that the outlook was bleak, he should not declare victory on election night, he was going to lose, and that his election fraud claims were, as former attorney Bill Barr called them, quote, bogus and silly, or idiotic, or stupid, complete nonsense, crazy stuff. Barr testified that he told Trump all the election fraud claims were, quote, bullshit, and doing a great, great disservice to the country. Trump broke with Team Normal that was trying to get him reelected, and instead went with Rudy Giuliani, who Stepien and campaign advisor Jason Miller described as intoxicated on election night. He also went with lawyer Sidney Powell and former trade advisor Peter Navarro down a deep rabbit hole of false conspiracies, all of which were debunked repeatedly by lawyers and Justice Department officials. Barr, for example, described the fast and furious nature of those conspiracies as whack-a-mole. The lies were used to bolster Trump's finances. An investigator from the committee said during the second hearing in a taped interview that $250 million was raised off the election lies from Trump supporters after Election Day, including $150 million in the first week. That was supposedly to fund the court cases that were being brought. But the investigator said most of the money, in fact, went to the group supporting Trump and not to fund the litigation. Congresswoman and committee member Zoe Lofgren said during that hearing, the big lie was also a big ripoff. Let's turn to the third hearing. The third hearing detailed intensive pressure campaign that Trump levied on former Vice President Mike Pence to do something that Pence knew he had no constitutional authority to do during the January 6th congressional proceeding to count the electoral votes. The 12th Amendment and the Electoral Count Act lay out a ceremonial role for the vice president to preside in this process. It's not one that gives him power to essentially overturn the results of an election. But Trump used an all-out campaign, including lawyers' memos, treats during the attack on the Capitol, and intimidation to pressure Mike Pence to reject the electors' votes for president or throw them back to the states. Trump referred to Pence 11 times during his speech on the ellipse on the day of the insurrection. He tweeted multiple times in the days leading up to January 6th, targeting Pence. He also lied in a statement about Pence agreeing with him about the power the vice president had. And multiple witnesses, including Trump's daughter, Ivanka, testified to a, quote, heated phone call on January the 6th between Trump and Pence. Witnesses described Trump using the word, quote, wimp, and saying that Pence did not have the courage to overturn the election. What Trump did not bank on was that the vice president actually did have the courage to refuse to engage in a criminal conspiracy or act. The fourth hearing showed that Trump pressured state officials to help him overturn the 2020 presidential election. The panel during this hearing featured testimony from 3 Republican officials who were all on the receiving end of Trump's outreach after the election. Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, his deputy Gabe Sterling, and Arizona House of Representatives Speaker Rusty Bowers. Like the previous hearings, these 3 officials testified about their unwillingness to participate in legally dubious schemes that would undermine the election, including efforts to subvert the Electoral College using fake pro-Trump electors. The 5th hearing. There, the committee detailed its findings of how former President Donald Trump pressured the Department of Justice to overturn the 2020 election results. 3 of Mr. Trump's top Justice Department officials Acting Attorney General Jeffrey Rosen, Acting Deputy Attorney General Richard Donoghue, and Assistant Attorney General Stephen Engel, all Republicans, recounted how Trump wanted the department to undermine and overturn the election, and how, when that effort failed, Trump nearly installed a loyalist in the form of Jeffrey Clark, who would carry out those demands. Trump said in a meeting, quote, "Just say the election was corrupt and leave the rest to me and the Republicans." Clark went before the committee in a private sworn deposition back in February. He did not answer any of the committee's questions. Instead, he pleaded the Fifth Amendment more than 100 times. On June 23rd, after the hearings were underway and the testimony had come out, the FBI searched Clark's residence. The same day, the FBI also seized the cell phone of John Eastman, the lawyer who had pushed the false claims of mass voter fraud and who had written the memo with a supposed legal justification for designating alternative, read, fake electors to replace the real ones who voted for Biden. This came to light because of Eastman's court filing to get his phone back. The sixth hearing, the January 6th committee held a surprise sixth hearing based on some actually quite shocking new evidence. White House aide Cassidy Hutchinson testified that on January the 3rd, 3 days before the insurrection, she had spoken with the former White House counsel for the Trump administration, Pat Cipollone. Trump wanted to go to the Capitol after the rally on January the 6th. Several days earlier, however, Hutchinson testified that Cipollone had told her that they needed to make sure that Trump did not go to the Capitol after the rally. His words, according to her testimony, were, "This would be a legally terrible idea for us. We have serious legal concerns if we go to the Capitol that day." He told her, "We're going to get charged with every crime imaginable if we make that movement happen." So she testified that Cipollone had warned in the days leading up to the attack on the Capitol that if Trump went to the protest, it would look like we were obstructing justice. That's what she said. Quote, "It would look like we were inciting a riot or encouraging a riot." And those are the words of the former White House counsel, according to Hutchinson. Hutchinson also testified about Trump becoming irate when he didn't get his way, throwing food against a wall, and also lashing out physically against a Secret Service person driving his limo who refused to drive Trump to the Capitol. More importantly, however, she testified that on January the 6th, Trump was angry that the crowd appeared smaller than he wanted for his rally at the Ellipse. She said that Trump stated in a tent backstage that he wanted the magnetometers removed to let more people in. She said Trump was angry that we weren't letting people through the mags with weapons. Trump said words to the effect of, quote, "I don't effing care that they have weapons. They're not here to hurt me. Take the effing mags away. Let my people in. They can march to the Capitol from here. Let the people in. Take the effing mags away." That was Hutchinson's testimony. She testified also, confirming prior witness testimony, that several Republican officials, congressmen, and advisors sought pardons from the president, including the president's own lawyer, Rudy Giuliani. None of them received them. At the end of the sixth hearing, Congresswoman Liz Cheney previewed in her closing remarks that the committee has evidence of witness tampering by those in, quote, Trump world, as one of those messages put it. And she promised more information in future hearings. Given Hutchinson's testimony, the day after she testified, the committee issued a subpoena to the former White House counsel, Pat Cipollone, who had sat for an informal interview with the committee on April 3rd, but according to a letter from the panel's chairman, he had declined to cooperate since then, citing executive privilege. However, on the seventh hearing that was just held last week, Pat Cipollone agreed to testify under oath as to all but direct conversations with the former president for which he claimed privilege. In his pre-recorded testimony presented by the committee, like Cassidy Hutchinson's testimony, the parts of his pre-recorded testimony that were presented were a bombshell. Cipollone confirmed Hutchinson's testimony about an unhinged meeting that took place on December 18th, 4 days after the Electoral College confirmed Joe Biden as the next president. And that meeting took place in the Oval Office. It soon became an expletive-laced screaming match, according to Cipollone. He testified about his surprise that a group of people had made it through to the president's office to push conspiracy theories about the election and figure out ways to keep Trump in power. The group included people like Sidney Powell and Rudy Giuliani, and he said that they showed a general disregard, quote, for the importance of actually backing up, say, facts. Then throughout the meeting, he said the outside group continued to accuse Trump's White House advisors of lacking the courage to continue contesting the election results. Other testimony during this hearing confirmed that the White House had been communicating with the Proud Boys and Oath Keepers since shortly after the election in November. An insider from the Oath Keepers and a rioter who pleaded guilty testified that Trump had called the people to Washington and that's why they came. Jason Van Tattenhove, who was a former national spokesman for the Oath Keepers and a close aide to the group's founder, Stuart Rhodes, testified that the organization is a, quote, dangerous militia that attracted white nationalists and, as he put it, straight up racists. He said, in fact, it's a, quote, violent militia in large part fed by the ego and drive of Stuart Rhodes. And he said that the fact that Trump was either directly or indirectly messaging with the group before the insurrection kind of gave Rhodes the nod. You may recall that on December 19th, the day after the unhinged meeting, Trump tweeted, "Big protest in DC on January 6th. Be there, will be wild." Well, immediately after that, and right up until January 6th, right-wing media, especially Steve Bannon, ran with this over and over and over. The testimony at this seventh hearing showed that Trump was given multiple chances to dial down the rhetoric, but instead he kept dialing it up right up until January 6th itself. Advisors warned him against attacking Vice President Pence in his ellipse speech, yet Trump added language anyway, doing exactly that after calling Pence a, quote, wimp, according to witnesses. Other witnesses said they were concerned about his rhetoric and his tweets about the January 6th rally, but he kept making them. His advisors warned him against marching to the Capitol, but he kept pushing and told the crowd he was going with them. Once again, at the end of this hearing, Liz Cheney, Congresswoman Liz Cheney, warned against witness tampering. She stated point blank that after the panel's last hearing on June 28th, Trump himself had tried to call one of the committee's witnesses that we have not yet heard from. But instead of taking the call, that person called his or her lawyer, and the lawyer called the committee. She delivered yet another shot across the bow that the committee will take witness tampering seriously. So that is the play-by-play, the hearing by hearing. I know it's a lot to take in, and that's why I'm doing this summary. And here is a summary of what the facts so far presented in all the 7 hearings to date have shown. And there's one more hearing that we know of that's coming this week. 1, Trump knew that what he was saying about the election was a lie. He knew the fake electors scheme was illegal. He knew Pence didn't have the constitutional authority to choose the president. He knew the demonstrators he had called to Washington were armed, but he sent them anyway. He deliberately put a target on Vice President Pence's back. When numerous people begged him to stop the rioters, Trump did nothing. Beginning on the night of the election up through January 6th, Trump tried multiple plans and strategies to stay in power. And when one failed or got shot down by advisors or lawyers, he simply moved on to the next one. January 6th was just Trump's last-ditch attempt after all the other strategies had failed to stay in power. All of these facts elicited by the J6 committee show Trump's state of mind. I would venture to suggest Trump's criminal state of mind, which will provide ample evidence of the mens rea necessary for DOJ to prove not just one crime, but multiple crimes. So I want to say, as more evidence is collected and revealed to the American people, the circle is closing in on one person as the hub of the seditious conspiracy. And it seems only a matter of time before the DOJ will indict Donald Trump. Lawrence Tribe, who's one of the foremost American constitutional scholars who teaches at Howard University, has warned that not holding the principal instigator to account for attempting to obstruct the peaceful transfer of power paves the way for someone else, smarter and even more Machiavellian than Trump, to disobey the rule of law in the future, which is an untenable proposition in a democracy. And don't think that Trump is stopping now. He continues to install loyalists around the country who presumably next time will do his bidding. If you remember nothing about what I've just summarized in all these 7 hearings, there is testimony of one witness you should not forget. Retired Judge Michael Luttig, who advised Mike Pence on his vice presidential role on January the 6th, told the J6 panel and the public during the 3rd hearing that Trump, his allies, and his supporters, through their continued rhetoric, continue to represent, quote, a clear and present danger to democracy. So I urge you to watch the remaining hearings for yourself as the mostly Republican witnesses testify under oath or plead the Fifth Amendment. Don't rely on me. Don't rely on your favorite media to summarize what's going on with those hearings. Judge for yourself the depth and danger of the democratic crisis we are in now. And remember, I've said a whole lot of times that there were a whole lot of lawyers involved in Trump's effort to overturn the election. So I suggest that you join me and the Democrats Abroad Africa Committee in August to learn more about an effort to hold all of the lawyers to account, all of the lawyers who were involved in the multiple frivolous lawsuits accountable for their seditious actions. So stay tuned for a virtual event with Michael Teeter, the founder and leader of the 65 Project, and hopefully the president of the National Bar Association will be joining us as well. Finally, folks, the facts that have come out during the J6 hearings so far show why it is even more urgent than ever for Americans to vote to preserve our democracy from the top of the ballot to the bottom. So let's mobilize, galvanize, and energize our strength together. Go to votefromabroad.org. Wherever you are, get active, join Democrats Abroad. We need you at the Democrats Abroad Africa Committee, so email me at Elisabeth_Myers@democratsabroad.org. Volunteer, appear, be there for American democracy, and let's let freedom ring. And that is the name of this report. Thanks for watching.